Welcome back to Behind the Curtain of Healthcare. This week, managing partner of U.S. Locums, Rich O'Donnell, shares his over 20 years experience in the locums and travel space. Whether you're a physician, allied health professional, or someone who hires them on a temporary basis, there's something here for you. Please like, subscribe, and share if you enjoy our content. And if you're listening to the podcast version, leave us a couple stars on your platform of choice. It really helps us out. Now let's get to the show. Tonight's guest is Rich O'Donnell, who earned his degree in Health Systems Administration at Auburn University. Rich brings close to 30 years of experience in the healthcare staffing industry and has a diverse background, having worked with physicians, advanced practice providers, as well as allied health and nursing professionals in the per diem, locums, and permanent placement direct hire markets. Rich began his healthcare recruiting and staffing career with Comp Health in 1992 and has remained in the healthcare staffing industry ever since. After spending the first 5 years as a recruiter or account manager, he moved into his first supervisory managerial role at Comp Health, and for the past 20 years has served in director and vice president level positions with Comp Health, Weatherby Healthcare, Vista Staffing, and HCA Healthcare. Rich is now the managing partner with U.S. Locums. So, locum tenens, what exactly is that?
Well, locum tenens is actually a Latin term, not to put everyone to sleep right off the bat, but it's a Latin term that basically means one who holds a place. So it's come to mean in the healthcare staffing environment, physicians and advanced practice providers specifically who are working in a temporary position. Whereas, the nursing space they refer to as travel staffing. So locums has come to denote more so the physician and advanced practice provider staffing areas.
So, what sort of things drive demand for locums versus permanent placement? Why would a hospital want a locums provider versus a permanent provider?
In terms of the client side drivers, one area is simply physician shortage and maldistribution. There are certain specialties, primary care is a great example, where there just simply aren't enough physicians. So therefore, if a hospital or a group doesn't have enough providers to meet patient demand, they're going to want a provider or more in there on a temporary basis, oftentimes while they're recruiting for a full-time provider. There's also maldistribution where, physicians, like a lot of other, well-educated people, a lot of them tend to want to gravitate towards more well-populated areas, metro, cities, suburbs, et cetera. So as a result, you can have, rural areas that draw patients in from a very large radius who don't have enough subspecialty providers, whether it be like a rheumatologist or an oncologist. So therefore, while they may be recruiting, a lot of times these places can be left without a provider at all for, years. So therefore, to kind of help keep the patient demand, to meet the patient demand as best as possible, they'll utilize locums on a long-term basis while they recruit. Other drivers can simply be seasonal fluctuations. Like right now we're in flu season, that can always drive up on demand in certain parts of the country, especially. You get the snowbird effect in places like Florida, Arizona, et cetera, where demand will spike when the population increases seasonally. You can also have situations where a group a hospital may need to replace a group that was contracted to provide, say, ER services or hospitalist or anesthesia services. And for whatever reason, that group, the contract is either not renewed, the group decides to leave because they can't meet terms, and now the hospital is facing a situation where the primary, the group that was providing those services is going to be leaving, and before they can either transition to a new group or bring it back in-house and hire people, they need to have temporary providers in there to bridge that gap, so there can be a transitional aspect as well. And then, another reason can also be they may have an increase in demand or they're testing a new service line, but before committing, all the dollars required to fully staff a new service line, they may want to have some locums in there longer term to kind of make sure that the demand is sustainable and that they can also work out some of the kinks prior to recruiting someone in full time or several people in full time to take over the new service line. So those tend to be some big drivers. And right now, I'd say that the shortage of physicians in a lot of areas is certainly one of the bigger drivers right now.
So would you say that, I know on the perm side, which I'm assuming directly correlates to locums need with people in my age group. Dare I suggest yours, Rich?
In what age group would that be, Fred?
Well, I don't know, Rich. I'm a self-proclaimed baby boomer. Jack knows that. And as we all know, as us baby boomers are continuing to go on the assembly line of life, there's not enough physicians. And I've done some homework. I don't remember the exact numbers at the moment, but I forget the year, but like by 2030, just in the next 10 years, I mean, the shortage generally is just continuing to increase. There's not enough physicians coming out to keep up with demand. I'm assuming that feeds directly into the need for locums as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think I've looked at some of the same, surveys or studies you're talking about. They're talking about the shortage could reach like 125,000 in the next 10 to 12 years. And if I remember correctly, some of that same information seemed to indicate that, the primary care specialties could be hit as equally with the subspecialty areas or the specialized areas, which I found a little bit surprising. But it just helps to show that the shortage is kind of running the gamut from primary care all the way to highly specialized providers. But that impacts, everything from, you don't have enough primary care providers for patients to be seen for, especially with the push for preventive health, wellness, population health models. But then feeding beyond that, you don't have enough specialists as well to have the primary care providers referring, their patients to when needed. And then you also have specialties where, that baby boomer thing you're talking about affects the physician population as well. I think another thing that I saw recently, roughly 1/3 of all physicians are like 55 or older. And that's an age when a lot of us are wanting to or planning to or wanting to at least slow down, if not outright retire. So as our population is aging, creating more demand for health care as well, we also have the physicians that are treating them aging along with them. And a lot of specialties don't have enough people, especially like psychiatry, again, is a good example. They don't have enough people going into the profession to help keep up with the demand that will probably increase.
So of the top specialties you've mentioned, I know you've kind of come on the fringe of primary care, I think a few times. Mm-hmm. What are the top 2, 3, 4 trends that you see at present as being the greatest in demand for locums?
For locums, primary care is certainly up there, although I also feel as though they've gotten so used to being short on primary care for so long that if you could present 5 or 6 primary care physicians to some large organizations, they potentially take them in a heartbeat, but they've gotten used to dealing with having fewer. Plus, that is an area where the advanced practice professionals can help out a little bit more so than some of the physician specialties. But things that we're seeing on our end for locums right now, we actually have a lot of surgery needs, and it runs the gamut. A lot of specialized like vascular surgery, interventional cardiology, not so much general surgery unless it's mixed in with some need to do trauma or like colorectal surgery. We also have a lot of subspecialty needs. Oncology right now is a really big need. That's another profession like psychiatry where you have a lot of physicians getting older, slowing down or retiring, and not as many physicians coming out of those training programs. It's a very demanding specialty, as we all can imagine, dealing with oncology patients. So that's another area where as the population continues to age and there are fewer and fewer physicians coming into those fields, we're seeing the impact of that on a locums basis. And I would put urgent care, ambulatory in there with the primary care. As you know, we're seeing more and more urgent care centers pop up that may not be necessarily the typical traditional definition of urgent care, but they're seeing more and more of the ambulatory clinic settings set up so that patients have more access without having necessarily a full-time dedicated primary care provider. Those settings are certainly in demand. I lump those in with primary care at this point.
So when you talk to a physician, let's say that's undecided about locums, and clearly some know for sure that's what they want to do, what do you see as the benefits? Why do you feel it's a good option for somebody that's spent a good number of years training? Mm-hmm. And then what are some of the perks for somebody choosing that pathway?
Sure. A lot of it has to do with no matter what stage of their career they're at. I would say flexibility And also there's an experiential factor. Someone coming right out of training, sometimes they could be doing it for a gap year between residency and fellowship. But a lot of them, you think about the dedication it takes to go not only through all the medical school training, but, undergrad, medical school, internship, residency, potentially fellowship. A lot of them are looking at it now and seeing that, wow, hey, locums could be a great way of not jumping right into another thing that I'm going to be committed to for 5, 10, 20 years and have an opportunity to experience different practice settings, get some experience understanding what different healthcare models look like, going to see different parts of the country, which can be more of a personal benefit. But those are some of the things that can really benefit a newer physician, so to speak, with their understanding of where they may really, really fit in well with a long-term position and what they really want to look for, as opposed to maybe what they thought they wanted in a practice when they were going through medical school, internship, residency, fellowship. But there's also some flexibility with that, because then they can also take time off to study for their boards, or take time off to actually travel or catch up with family that they haven't spent much time with. And then at the other end of the spectrum, someone who's looking at it as a retirement vehicle or semi-retirement vehicle, it can be a great way to continue practicing medicine, which most physicians still enjoy doing. It's all the other stuff that they get a little bit tired of, the bureaucracy, the politics that can be involved with large groups or hospitals. But then the ability to pick and choose their schedule and say, okay, I'll commit to this 3-month primary care assignment, or I'll go and commit to being a hospitalist for a 1 week on, 1 week off schedule for the next 6 months, but I'm going to have half my time off during those 6 months, and then potentially also take another 2 months fully off once that commitment's over with. It's a great way to keep practicing medicine, have an income coming in, then that maybe if they retired outright would not be there. But then also get to travel a little bit and, again, stay involved with medicine.
Are there any jobs out there, locums jobs for physician recruiters that you're aware of?
Well, if you want to be a contract recruiter, there's certainly jobs like that out.
You did make me think, though, Rich, because I know in certain specialties, the attrition rate is like 50% of residents that take their first job actually move on, whether it's before their contract is up or after their 3-year commitment is up, they move on. And I wonder if some physicians that maybe think they know what they want actually experimented, to your point, in some different environments, would mature them or season them a little bit in their thought processes and give them a little more surety. And that might impact actually their sustainability in their first quote unquote permanent position.
I think I don't have any actual data that would suggest that there's a good correlation with that. But, you and I have both been doing this a long time, locums and perm. We've certainly talked to our share of physicians over the last, 20 plus years who jumped into a perm job. And like you said, within a year or two are looking to move on, either because a partnership didn't come to fruition or didn't work out, or just a variety of factors that could come up. And I do really feel as though if some of them are able to, what I would call, decompress a bit and get out of that the wheel that they've been in since starting medical school, and just kind of go experience life a little bit, and also get to work some different settings, that may give them a lot more insight into what they really, really want to focus on when they get into a practice. The other thing is, if you're a locums physician and you're working at a practice where there's some, people who are more experienced than you and have been there, you'll start picking up on some things that they're sharing with you about, hey, this happened to me when I joined a group right out of training, and look out for this, or, hey, I never thought about this as a factor, but I should have put more focus on, the time off, or how many weeks of call I would or wouldn't have. Those are things that you're going to pick up on from all these different physicians that you'll come across or work with, when you're doing locums assignments. And that will then also help shape your own, in my opinion, your own thought process when you're looking at some different practice opportunities.
So how does the structure actually work, Rich? If I was a physician and called you, would I expect to be employed by your company, or where is your role, if you will, in your company's role, and what are my responsibilities, and how do I get paid, and who does the scheduling and takes care of the traveling and all the credentialing that has to take place. I'm like loading all this on you in one question, and I know it's a lot, but like that would be in my mind if I really was not familiar with the locum space. Mm-hmm. So it might seem a little daunting, like I don't really know that dynamic. So what does that look like when a doctor calls you that's a little unfamiliar with the structure? And
So I'll try to address them. If I'm skipping over one of the areas, just jump in and remind me. So when you work locums as a physician, you are an independent contractor. If you're an advanced practice professional, most times you are also an independent contractor. However, there's a little bit of a different litmus test per the IRS, the federal government, to where some companies will treat them as W-2. And then in certain types of assignments or contractual relationships, you may really be better off being classified as W-2. So there's some gray area there that you have to be careful of. But in general, let's just assume you're going to be an independent contractor. When you do work with U.S. locums, whether you're a doctor or an advanced practice professional, you are an independent contractor. So what that does mean right off the bat is that you don't have to accept an assignment. We're not your employer. If you don't want to take an assignment that you haven't already committed to, you don't have to go. We don't dictate where you go to work. We'll present assignment opportunities to you if we come to agreement on the terms, the compensation, the travel, and the client also wants you to confirm to you, then we do expect you to go. But you do have a 30-day out where you can exercise it if something comes up and you can't fulfill the full obligation, or that dream perm job comes up and they want you to start earlier, and rather than doing 6 months, you're going to do 4 months. That does provide some flexibility as an independent contractor that's not necessarily there as much as a W-2. As far as how the process works, it really needs to be as consultative as you would think if you're trying to figure out whether someone's a good fit for a full-time job. Because with locums, while you're not committing long-term necessarily, you as the locums recruiter really need to understand, why is this individual wanting to do locums? Because if they're wanting to do locums for reasons that don't really make sense for an assignment, you're going to have a mismatch, which can lead to disastrous results for the provider, for the client, and for you as the company.
Can you give me an example of that, Rich?
Sure. So let's say someone wants long-term stability and they think if they take a locums job, they're going to be able to work. Let's say it's a hospitalist. They're going to work 14 shifts a month, 7 on, 7 off, same schedule for the next 6 months. In theory, that might be what the client is looking for. But the client also may be looking to hire perm. And if they hire someone 3 months in who's going to start, 30, 45 days later, that individual, the locums person shifts could start getting cut. So you need to make sure that the physician understands that this is what the need is. This is what we're looking for. However, yes, the client's needs could change, just as you as the provider could have a change as well. So you really try to be as upfront as possible, so that they understand, what they're getting into, as well as what their obligations are. Typically speaking, when I'm talking to a provider, as far as what I expect them to do, I would just want them to be honest with me about why they're looking to do locums, what they're looking for in a locums assignment, what kind of commitment they're looking for, and then also let them ask questions about, how does U.S. locums work? How does a particular assignment work? Because, assignments can differ in terms of the requirements, in terms of the number of hours. Assignments will have different pay rates as well. Even for the same provider with the same job description, the compensation could vary a little bit as well. But if you come to agreement on what they're looking for, then the idea is you're presenting them opportunities that are a good fit for them, not just throwing a bunch of stuff at them because you're trying to get, to fill a job. You're really hopefully presenting things that they will sit there and go, yeah, okay, not the right fit for me, but I understand why you're presenting this to me, but I'm going to take a pass on this one. Or, hey, it's not quite what I'm looking for in this respect. Do you have anything that might be closer to, this location where on my weekends off, I can drive and go, see family that lives nearby? Or is that a pipe dream that I'm going to be able to, gallivant around the countryside on the weekends and then come back to the assignment and work Monday through Friday?
So if I could ask, so how do you address pay rate?
What's that?
Pay rate. How do you address that? And clearly, I mean, if there's a physician that's done locums before, and they kind of know the guardrails of fairness, it's probably an easy conversation. Let's say it's somebody that's not as familiar with fair market value, and you're talking to them. How do you kind of engage in that conversation when it comes to rates? Because to your point, within a given specialty, the rates do vary. So it's a sensitive topic, but how do you address it?
If I'm not talking to a provider about a specific assignment that has come up and has prompted their interest, if I'm just talking to them in general, I will let them know that there might be this kind of a range that we typically see for, let's say it's a vascular surgeon looking more so for long weekend coverage to supplement income to help put a kid through safer college. We have assignments that could range from a flat rate of $1,600 per 24 hours to one that could be $2,000 per 24 hours. But what drives the difference in rate can be, what's the volume expectation? How long do rounds take? How many of those callback hours? Typically with a 24-hour call assignment, a certain number of hours of callback time or patient care are considered quote unquote free because you're not billing the client for that. So you could have an assignment where a provider is being told by one company, hey, we've got one for $2,000 per 24 hours, and the first 2 hours are free, but after that, we're going to pay you, $250 an hour in overtime.
So you would normally, if I was asking you, Rich, you would normally just say, well, here's what the job offers, or are you normally asking me if, again, I'm not overly familiar, or perhaps I am, what kind of pay rate are you thinking about? How do you approach that with it?
It can go either way. Sometimes if there are physicians who are extremely experienced with locums, do this a lot, and they'll want to get into what I would call the transactional part of the conversation pretty quickly because they don't want to waste their time. Look, this is what I'm looking for. Does the assignment offer this or not? And you'll do a little bit of like general negotiation before you can get down to the idea of, okay, let's take a step back now and talk a little bit more about here's the procedures that are required. Here's the setup of the whether they're a trauma 2 or no trauma designation at all. Are you doing a lot of ER consults? How many calls per 24 hours you're normally getting? How many procedures might be involved in that 24 hours? Because if someone starts saying, well, whoa, wait a minute, I'm going to do X amount of hours free, I want to go and work, so I don't have a problem getting a lower per 24-hour rate. But if I'm not going to do any procedures, I'd rather go to a place where I'm going to have a lot more procedures, have a slightly lower 24-hour rate, but know that I'm going to make a lot of money in overtime through procedures. So you can start off kind of transactional, have to work your way backwards a little bit as you get an idea of what they're looking for and why, then explain the particulars of your assignment that you're talking about and see where it translates. Because there can be an assignment where the comp rate for 24 hours is a little bit lower, but they're going to make a lot more money normally on the back end through their patient care in surgical procedures.
How often do you find that you actually engage with a physician and they take a job through you in a state they don't have licensure in yet? Are the lion's share of your I hate to use the word transaction, the lion's share of your placements, I don't like transactions. The lion's share of your placements, are they usually within the geography of the doctor, like lion's share, like 80-90%? Or do you find a lot of outliers that are willing to wait and get licensed somewhere where the fit is there?
Yeah. For us right now, the vast majority of our assignments are in states where the provider is already licensed. We do have assignments more so with CRNA where we are getting the provider's license, partly because the time frame for doing so with nurse practitioners or CRNAs is compressed largely because of the compact that's been in place much longer for nursing than it has on the physician side of the fence there. So we're a smaller firm still, so we tend to have more of our assignments occurring in states where the physician is already licensed. Mm-hmm. It is very true that some of your larger, more established firms like your Comp Health, your Weatherby's, et cetera, because of the amount of time they've been in business and the client relationships that they have developed over 3 decades or so of business, they will have more aggressive licensing plans or more aggressive plans for licensing providers than a smaller firm like ours will. Over time, that will change for us. But for right now, the vast majority of assignments we put together are in states where the physician is already licensed.
So does your company also handle the credentialing?
Oh, absolutely.
For the doctor with the hospital, cover the med mal, and takes care of that?
Yeah, it's pretty standard. Most firms, but it is still a great question for a provider to ask before they get too deep in with a firm. But our firm, like most, does handle the travel, the lodging, and then also the credentialing, the privileging. We have dedicated staff for that. Most firms do. There are some firms I know where the person that the physician may be speaking to about assignments and contracts and rates will then hang up the phone and be looking up on a travel site for their travel and or trying to fill in paperwork for credentialing, which, in essence, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's only so much you can do. Plus, as we know, most salespeople aren't great at following high-level detailed paperwork. So we find that there's a skill set that lends itself.
You've been talking to my wife. You've been talking to my wife. You've been talking to my wife behind my back.
Yeah. So, hey, my wife's an ex-credentialer too, so believe me, I got the same comparison. But no, there are folks with a skill set that lend itself extremely well to facility privileging, more so than necessarily sales or recruiting. So we utilize those folks to take care of the privileging because that's their wheelhouse. They have an expertise in it, and that allows us to spend more time trying to get more candidates as well as find new jobs to present to our candidates as well.
All right, so let me address this because I've lived on multiple sides of the healthcare pendulum, if you will, both in recruiting in an agency environment and then recruiting for a system internally, if you will. And there is a perception by some on the hiring end, aside from the a higher cost, because usually it's not untypical for a client to pay more for staffing or for locums than if they found somebody perm. But as well, there's sometimes a quality belief that if they're going to locums that, not to be ill-spirited about it, but that they can't find work in their own zip code. I've literally heard that before, and that's why I'm saying it. I didn't make that up, by the way. That I've heard that comment before.
I've heard it a few times in my 30 years as well.
So, and then as well, we've had locums and, they're very transactional. That's why I said earlier, I don't like that word transactional. They're very transactional. They don't take the time to integrate with our staff. They're, here kind of punching a clock. We've had quality concerns, and that's true. You could say that about across the board, about whether somebody's permanent or not, but those are kind of some of the negative stigmas that are out there. So I was curious how you deal with that when you hear those things.
So in general, I would say that, when locum started 40 years ago, the stigma was more there than it is today. I mean, if you look at it, if you were to talk to 20 physicians randomly, how many of them either worked locums or know someone who did locums? Not someone who passed through the facility, but a colleague who did it for whatever reason. So I think the stigma of who does locums and why they're doing locums while it's still there is nowhere near what it was like when I even started, 30 years ago, or even what it was, 10 years ago. Can there still be some quality issues? I mean, are there doctors that are looking for locums because they do have a hard time keeping a perm job or getting one? Absolutely. That is where a firm needs to have very good credentialing guidelines in place, not just for speaking of it to a client, oh, here's what we do, but actually living by it and adhering to it so they're not trying to pass along a subpar candidate to a particular client. Now, I would also argue that in terms of when we have an issue with a provider on an assignment, it tends to be either expectation or acclamation. Expectation is, did the client and the recruiter set up the right expectation with the candidate for this is the patient volume, this is how many are new patients per day, how many are follow-up patients. If the volume is a little bit higher than what the provider's used to, well, what's the provider used to? Is the provider used to having support staff in place to help with getting the patient into the room and getting started on some of their basic information, or are they used to doing it all on their own? If they're used to doing it all on their own, and now all of a sudden they have good support in place, that ends up helping to equalize the volume. However, if a client's expecting a physician to see, 40 patients a day, and the provider's used to seeing in a similar staffing model 25 or 30, who's fooling who by thinking that the physician is going to be able to walk in and see that level of patients, especially when he or she is new, doesn't know the protocols necessarily. It may be an EMR that they've never used before or haven't used in a long time or are going to be slow on. So that's where the expectation really needs to match. And I think sometimes it's not so much that the physician was inferior and that's why it didn't work out. But sometimes clients, if it's a temporary physician, don't take the extra time to help figure out what do I need to do to help make sure this is as successful as possible. And that's why an onboarding plan is extremely vital to an assignment getting off to the best start possible, because a successful onboarding plan will include EMR training. Even if the physicians used it before, they could need some rust knocked off, or they could, have the new facility could have a different way of utilizing it, that the physician needs to have someone sit down and train, him or her on it, walk through it. And we even have some clients where they have very busy practices, but because they understand this, they'll give the provider for the first couple of shifts a lot fewer patients than normal to help make sure that some of those kinks, whether it's EMR or protocol or whatever, are getting worked out. Doesn't mean the physician's not pulling their weight, but if you hire, a brand new physician and it's their first week on the job, do you, because they're a permanent employee or hopefully going to be a long-term employee, what did you do as the client to help them get set up for success from day one? Because a lot of times if a client's honest with themselves, they're not necessarily doing the same level of onboarding, so to speak, to help ensure success as they will with someone who's going to be coming in as a full-time employee.
Why do you think that is, Rich? I could speculate. Why do you think that is?
It's a couple of things. I think one, from the business standpoint of, well, hey, we're paying this locums firm and we're basically paying you to come in and see a bunch of patients. We want you to hit the ground running. Okay, fair enough. But what are you doing as well to help make sure that provider is able to hit the ground running? And then the flip side of it as well is, if you ask a candidate who's done locums, who's a very good physician, gets good reviews, is well liked, has good training, assignments that they've been on that didn't work well, a lot of times it's didn't really get very good onboarding training, fell behind quickly, other staff, whether it's doctors or nurses, got upset, got off on the wrong foot, and it's hard to recover from that because right away they're like, oh, temp doc, not pulling their weight. Now, can that happen? Of course it can, but there's a lot of things that can be put in place early on to help address things that typically lead to assignments getting off to a rough start. Now, a personality thing, that brings up one of the things that I feel is something that any provider getting ready to do locums really needs to self-assess and be aware of, is as a locums provider, whether you're a physician, a primary care doctor, a surgeon, whatever, you're coming in, you're basically a guest in this other person's place of employment. You need to be ready to be adaptable and be a little bit flexible. It doesn't mean you practice medicine in a way you're not comfortable with, but it does mean you have to be understanding of the fact that there's different protocols in place. There's different personalities in place that you may be used to dealing with. There's different ways of doing things. You have to be ready to help be as adaptable and flexible to them as you want them to give you a chance to adapt to them as well. And that is one of the things, it's the expectation, the acclimation, but then honestly, sometimes if a physician doesn't have the right mentality of being able to go in somewhere and be flexible, they may not be the right person to be doing locums. And that has to be taken into account.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's really inflexible, you're going to have a hard time doing locums.
No, I get it, because your rock star physicians that do locums, and I'm really thinking very much on the surgery side, where you've got a team around you, and you could walk into a myriad of different environments at different places. The rock star physicians that do well are really integrated in their personality. They know how to bring people in. They treat people respectfully, and they're not super rigid. Those are your real, the ones that really, really do a great job. I'm curious, what percentage of the physicians that you work with and then accept an assignment is your client actually speaking with on the phone before the assignment is agreed upon by both, or what percentage of it is, and I'll go back to that transactional word, where a client's just looking at a resume, listening to your feedback, agreeing to the rate, and taking just your feedback as good enough for me. How does that play out?
I can't think of a locums assignment where the client has not at least had a phone chat with the provider. A lot of times it could be an administrative contact first, whether it's a recruiter, a director of recruiting, someone along those lines, that then passes it on to a clinical provider, whether it's a chief of the department or even a well-seasoned physician there to talk through, so that they can talk provider to provider, a little bit more understanding of what the clinical match is, what their expectations are. So I can't think of a locums assignment I've had where the provider who went on the assignment did not have at least one, if not two, conversations with representatives from the facility.
So what are a couple critical factors a provider working on a locums basis should be aware of? I know Fred just touched on some of them for individual placements, but let's say that they want to have a long relationship with a firm like yours, and they really like locums, they really like the lifestyle. What are some of the important things when you're looking long-term locums?
Adaptability, but then also the flexibility of the assignments. If they want to be able to work locums nonstop with very little downtime, you can't expect the perfect assignment in terms of location, duration, and preferred comp to always be there necessarily. So if they want to work with as few firms as possible, and they want to be able to continue to work locums assignment, there's a level of flexibility that they need to be able to display in terms of, hey, you know what, I really wanted a 3-month assignment, but this one sounds pretty good. It's only for 2 months. What do you have coming up behind that? Or what expectation can I have that when this one's done, I can get to work? Maybe there's a week or 2 weeks off, but what do you have for me that could follow up with that? So a lot of that has to do with a little bit of flexibility, not expecting every assignment to dot every I and cross every T, 5 or 6 points across. That's a big part of it. I think the other part is, making sure when you're evaluating a locums firm that you feel good about the person you're talking to, and then also understanding, because this varies from one firm to another. Okay, I'm talking to you right now. You're my recruiter. Who am I talking to about the next assignment or the one after that? Who's handling my payroll? How do I process that? How do I know my travel's getting done? Who takes care of that? Just really understanding all those components, because locums is ultimately a kind of a team sport where, I'm with a smaller firm. I work both sides of the desk. I'll work as a recruiter. I'll also be the client account manager. But then we have different personnel that do payroll. We have different personnel that do credentialing. Some of the folks that do travel also take care of, not just the lodging, but the payroll. But you can literally have 4 different people, even with a small firm like ours, that one provider may speak to regarding details of one assignment: recruiter, travel and lodging, payroll, credentialing. There are some firms that are much more segmented, that are larger, where you could literally have 2 times as many people potentially talking to that provider over the course of a month about a current assignment that's up for that's being planned, but then also getting contacted by other representatives in the company about other opportunities. And you may be getting calls from a scheduler or an assignment coordinator who you don't know is calling you, but they're going to say, hey, I'm with XYZ company. I work with, Jane, your recruiter, calling you about a different opportunity. So some providers get a little sensitive and put off by getting so many calls from, technically one company, but that's how that company as a large one is able to do so many different assignments. But some of them do get tired of that and like the lower touch rate, so to speak, by being able to always speak to someone like me about an assignment. Every once in a while, I may have a colleague who knows the client that much better because it's their client. I may have them talk to them through some of the nuances of it. But generally speaking, are you comfortable with who you're dealing with as your main representative? Do you understand their model in terms of how their travel and lodging is done? How is the privileging done? Payroll. We pay direct deposit weekly. There are some firms most firms do direct deposit now, but a lot of firms may only pay every 2 weeks, which, most physicians don't have an issue with, but a lot of them like the fact that they're getting paid every week by us. They also want to know, is the person doing my privileging someone who's been doing this for a long time, or is it someone who doesn't know a hospital privileging application from a mortgage application? Because privileging can really slow down an assignment if you're not on top of the details, moving things along. And with a lot of locums assignments, you're under the gun trying to meet certain deadlines. And that's another area that physicians and advanced practice providers need to be aware of as well. We can't make the magic happen with getting privileges done quickly if the physician doesn't do his or her part as well by submitting certain documents that our privileging staff needs to help pre-fill applications or send off verifications or address the hospital's questions to help keep things moving along. So that's another component. As much as everyone hates paperwork and we do what we can to minimize it for the physician, there are certain things that they need to help us with or help any firm with in order to make an assignment be successful in terms of starting on time and not, spending the first week on an assignment doing orientation and onboarding when you should have been working on day 2.
So I'm going to play Tony Robbins for a second. We're going to just pretend that
He's got a lot more hair than you, Fred. I don't know.
Well, he's got a lot more hair. He's much taller than me. The bank is much better than mine. But I did listen to his tapes about 50 years ago when I was up at 2:30 in the morning. I did order them.
What's a tape?
It was tape back then. It was a cassette. They were cassettes, yes. So let's pretend in the world of Tony Robbins that you're a doctor. Let's just pretend that you are. And you're calling, or a recruiter calls you about a locums position. How are you going to have any clue as to measuring if this is an organization you want to work with? And instead of giving me, I'm going to ask you to flip this around, Rich. Instead of giving me the 10 things that prove that a company's a good company and a solid company, because you just kind of went through a number of those processes, tell me what are some of the signs that would tell you as a doctor, for somebody listening to this that maybe has not done locums before, that gets called incessantly by a lot of people, hey, this may be either a recruiter or a firm I want to keep distance from. So I'm kind of flipping the question. What would be some warning tells to you?
Warning signs?
Yeah, that you would say, pause if you hear this.
Well, I think the first thing is relatively obvious. If the individual that you're speaking with doesn't know vascular surgery from cardiothoracic surgery or, outpatient primary care from a hospitalist position, that right there should be a pretty big warning sign. And it sounds a little flippant, but there are so many recruiting firms out there now, and let's narrow it down to locums. I think there's like over 300 locums firms now. So there is an expertise that you develop through working in healthcare staffing to where you understand things about specialties and how the business works. And there's a lot of folks out there. And at one point I was one of them who didn't know anything. And if you're the physician speaking to an individual and that individual can't really talk the lingo well enough to be able to tell you, this is what the assignment is, this is what the job duties are, this is how we work, this is what I would need from you next, but then also asking, what questions do you have for me? Your gut instinct is probably going to be pretty dead on. With even if the individual is the most genuine person in the world, if they don't have any kind of expertise or product knowledge, so to speak, that could be an indicator that everything leading up to potentially going to work there is going to be a little bit of an uphill battle or a struggle. And, it sounds a little unfair because we all have to start somewhere, but that also gets back to a little bit of a training mentality for the firms and how they're helping their people get set up for success, as we talked about with, onboarding a new provider. Same thing with helping your less experienced recruiters understand, what this job really is and how you can chat with a physician about an assignment opportunity. But, beyond that, let's say the individual that the physician is talking to has been doing this for at least a few years, knows the drill. If you feel like that individual is trying to push you into an assignment because they're trying to fill it and they need to get it filled today, and they're not willing to listen to you, they're just telling you all the reasons you should take this job and why you should work for this company. Yeah, that's a used car salesman, not to belittle anyone who's in the car salesman, but it's a stereotypical used car approach. It really gets back to a lot of what you were talking about, which is relationship building. And hopefully you can talk to someone who's going to take a little bit more of a consultative approach. But I'll tell you that with locums, a lot of locums physicians, especially ones who've been doing this a lot of the time, they're going to ask you, what is it? Where is it? How much is it? When is it? And what are you going to do for me about it? So you have to be able to address some of those transactional things enough to help the physician understand and help you understand whether there's a potential here. But then at some point in time, hopefully your experience as a recruiter allows you to, basically, for lack of a better way of putting it, take some control back in the conversation, reel it back to a little bit more of a, go back from the, in your face view. Let's take the 30,000 foot view and, well, hey, tell me, you seem to have strong interest in locums. Tell me what's going on. What's your situation like now? And they may have dropped a line of, well, we'll have a locums assignment that's ending in a month. Okay, well, how long have you been there? Why is it ending? What have you liked about it? What are you looking for in the next locums assignment? How quickly do you want to start? So you're trying to then pull it back a little bit to get a little bit more consultative and really, peel the onion back a little bit more to get that bigger picture of how can I help this individual? And beyond that, it's, do I want to help this individual as well in terms of how are they dealing with me? And are they showing any, ability to have a dialogue and not just try to steamroll their way into whatever it is they're looking for?
I think the key word for me, Rich, you just said consultative. To me, it's like, is somebody selling and telling, or are they listening, and are they bringing perspective and trying to really provide guidance and some sense of knowledge and wisdom versus just filling a slot and booking hours on a board.
Right.
I was talking to a doctor earlier today, not on a locums issue, but it's kind of a similar sentiment, if you will, where he went to 3 locations to interview. 2 of them were with my clients and 1 was not. And we spoke very objectively, and I wanted to know what was the best fit. He gave me a view that he had. He gave me a different view that his wife has. And I said, look, before we do anything, you guys need to put your heads together and think about what's best for you. And then I can help guide you, whether it's negotiate accordingly, but it's not about pushing. And I try to treat every person I talk to, every physician, objectively, because I truly, truly want what's best for them. Yep. And I think they understand, or they sense. You used the word gut earlier. We know when we're being sold, and the sharks are circling the tank. We know when we walk into a sales room, you see about 8 people leaning in, and they're looking at each other. Who's next up in line to talk to this schlub?
Yeah.
And who really is taking an honest interest in trying to help you make a good decision.
Right. Yep.
And that's a vibe thing, as well as listening to how people interact with you.
And I think if you and I were to sit there and just have a chat about it, I think the thing that you and I one of the things you and I like about recruiting is it ultimately is about building relationships. some of the most fun you have as a recruiter is developing relationships, getting to understand what someone's looking for, how you can help them, and whether you make them match or not. I'll tell, when I used to train, a lot of recruiters, I would basically tell them, you want to be able to have like it's a conversation, like you're chatting with a friend about a job change they're contemplating. So you're trying to help them, you're trying to help understand for yourself what they're looking for and why. And then you're also kind of feeding them back information about, about your thoughts. And ultimately, whether you help that individual directly or not, if you do your job in a way that you can feel good about, and they would say, you know what, so-and-so didn't get me a job, but ultimately I respect them and I would recommend them. That's what it boils down to, because you're not going to find every person you talk to a job, because then it would be called filling, not recruiting, right? But you can't find everybody a job. But if you're able to feel good about what you do and you enjoy it, the success will follow. That's the basic way to look at it. And that's the fun you have as a recruiter, is you can be talking about the same job all day long trying to find the right fit. But if you sell it the same way to every person, you're not listening to anybody and how it's going to help them. For one person, it may be a fit because it's 20 miles from their house. For another person, it may be a fit because the schedule's great. For another person, it may be great because it gets them closer to family once a week. It just depends. And if you listen to them, you'll find out how to make those fits, and you're not selling, then it's a little bit more of a natural dialogue there. And that's where the fun comes in.
There are times that, honestly, I'm talking to a physician and I will purposely say something that potentially derails their interest in taking the position that I've presented, because I really treat it as if I have no vested interest. I really want to understand what they're thinking and how they're really feeling. And when I say something that might push them away, just to be candid, because I like, if I'm sensing there's an elephant in the room, metaphorically, I like to get it out.
Yeah.
And so they know that I'm really trying to be supportive of them. And if we address it and it really wasn't an issue, then okay, great.
Yeah.
But, there's no slinking around the issues, or, it's all about being direct and candid and honest. And if a doctor doesn't feel that, and they don't feel that synergy with their recruiter, then they probably either have the wrong recruiter or possibly the wrong company, because I do sometimes see that companies tend to hire more people minded. I've seen that. Or sometimes there's just somebody that's not perfectly.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
So Rich, let me ask, being that you've been in the locum staffing industry since before time began, what are some of the trends and changes you've seen over the years? I know I've seen some, but I'm curious, because you are really an expert in this space. What are the changes that you've witnessed?
When you look back at the industry starting, almost 40 years ago to now, and again, I think if most physicians who have been in practice for even say 15 years, they've either done locums, whether it's traditional locums or like a local fill-in thing, or know a colleague, not just someone who passed through their facility, but have a colleague that they know did locums. That in and of itself is a big shift from where it was 30 years ago, where there was a lot more conversation about, well, why would I want to do locums? How's that going to look to an employer? Well, right now, it's so much more part of the system. I mean, there are I think 50,000 providers, physicians and advanced practice providers who do locums every year, and not all of them are doing it full time. Again, it can be people doing supplemental work, gaps in schedule, whatever. The fact that it's a much more recognized and accepted part of the medical industry has led to the trends where organizations are more willing to use it to have staffing for testing out a service line longer term, or being able to really roll with the punches with seasonal staffing, to like an urgent care center starting up and not having enough full-time hires, so they're supplementing it with local PRN staff. You still get some of that, I don't really know that I want that on my resume, but it happens so much less frequently. And quite honestly, I don't know, you tell me, how much does it come up now on the perm side of things, where you're asking for a physician and you're looking at their resume where they did locums for, say, a year, are you as the perm consultant as worried about explaining that to a client today or finding out from a candidate why they did it as you may have been, 15 years ago?
Is that a question?
Yeah. I mean, are you finding that it's less of an issue for you?
No, and I'm glad you asked that question, because I had just written down a similar thought process I was going to ask you about, Rich. So, no, if it's a year, no. And I just asked them, tell me about the year, and I may not even know that it was locums unless the CV literally says whether it be staffing or U.S. locums or locums assignment. They may just put the hospital name and it's a year. Yeah. So I kind of take more of a generic set of eyes to a CV, and I just look for mobility, and then I walk through it with them. And to your point, if they did a year of locums, to me, it's not worrisome. What's worrisome if there's a 3-year gap on their resume, and you're like, well, what were you doing those 3 years? But I'm glad you asked, because when somebody kind of has done locums for a while, and a while could be 4, 5, 6 years, and those you've seen them, the resumes, because they'll put everywhere they've been, and it's several pages of, and so from a plausibility perspective, when I'm talking to a client, I do have to ask them, I have to have a very candid conversation with them to say, hey, they're going to want to know what epiphany happened for you or what life change happened, because they're going to look at your resume and think, what is the sustainability? Does a zebra metaphorically really change its stripes? Right. If somebody's inclined to want the mobility, it doesn't mean they're a bad physician, but that's where sometimes a perm client may be apprehensive to say, geez, this person's years. Yeah. Do I feel like comfortable investing that suddenly they had some change of heart? And so there's some navigating that, that kind of situation.
Right. But I think the fact that you use an example where someone may have done locums for 4, 5, or 6 years as opposed to for a year. Yeah. That kind of helps highlight exactly what has changed with the perception of locums, because we're not talking 25 years ago when someone said, oh, you did locums for 6 months. What was that all about? It might be, you still want to know and understand it. But I totally would understand and agree that if someone does locums for 4, 5, or 6 years and all of a sudden decides they want to plant a flag in the ground and go to the same place every day for, the next however many years, of course, that's a legitimate question, because even if they have great reasons for needing to or wanting to do that, you still have to then question, okay, well, how are you going to feel about coming to work here after 3 months and going, well, wait a minute, it's the same place and now it's day 91, So totally get that. But I think the fact that you use an example of someone who did locums for multiple years and then wants to go get a perm job, that helps kind of highlight exactly how far the locums industry has changed in the last, 20, 30 years.
What do you see as far as consolidation? You feel, you and I are probably very familiar with who the larger, organizations are. Do you feel like there's been a lot of consolidation, or maybe you addressed it earlier, that there's actually bigger companies now, but there's also a lot of smaller companies? Because I think maybe some of the bigger companies kind of have acted as a springboard for people that got really good in those companies and decided to leave, and then they start their own organizations.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, actually. Obviously, you don't get to 200 plus 300 companies technically in the locum space if there isn't some fragmentation. So even with the consolidation of some firms buying up other locums firms, a lot of what you are seeing are, private companies buying locums firms to add to their healthcare portfolio of, hey, we only did nurse staffing and maybe we did PTO team. We're going to go buy a locums firm to add to our physician space, or more often maybe the other way around. But you do see consolidation, because some of the smaller firms, they like the idea of cashing out, so to speak, and getting bought out by a larger firm, but which can also help accelerate their own growth. Hopefully it's a good marriage with the smaller firm and the larger firm and why they're doing it. But ultimately, while there is still consolidation and acquisitions going on, there's a lot of, I mean, bottom line is healthcare is such a huge marketplace, and the shortage, things like we talked about, the shortage, the maldistribution, the aging population, physicians aging as well. There's going to be ongoing demand for healthcare staffing, a need for it. So you're going to continue to have firms entering the space, whether it's locums or full-time placement, as well as, nursing in some other areas. So I think there will always be some level of consolidation through acquisitions and mergers. But then I think you're going to have continuing firms, like a U.S. Locums or other people who decide to, they've got a certain level of experience and can, get the right resources put together to help start a firm and are going to go for it. And that's how the whole thing started. I mean, Comp Health, the big boy out there, at one point was a couple of people sitting around a small room. Vista Staffing started in someone's garage as an offshoot from, Comp Health. So there's just a lot of that. And, it still goes on today, and we'll see what firms, 20 years from now, maybe are the big boys on the block. But there's a lot of demand for healthcare staffing. It's not going to go away. And that's just going to breed even more, people coming into the business or doing some strategic alliances to kind of increase their breadths of healthcare staffing to hospitals and other organizations that use nurses, use PTs and OTs, use doctors, use lab techs. There's just going to be all kinds of stuff like that still going on, I think.
Well, I did want to share with you guys, my wife and I just hired our first employee.
Oh, congratulations.
And I wanted to introduce her to you guys. Her name is Blanquita.
Oh, is that a poodle?
Yes.
I'm a big fan of poodles.
Get back on the phones, Blanquita.
It's going to change the recruiting game. So one last, I was joking around with Fred before we started recording, but do you think the industry as a whole provides enough protection for clients if there's a no-show situation?
Well, it depends on what you mean by protection. I mean, obviously,
I'll explain it for you, Rich, if you need someone to.
What's in terms of like what they've spent to that point to get a provider on, or what do you do about coverage as a backup?
No. Yeah. Yes, that. And the question that Jack brings up, and this is always something that's resonated in my mind more on the client side, again, because I was in-house as well as, in an agency as I am once again today, but that it feels that the protection is really there for the doctor, because if the client decides the assignment's no longer needed, there's a financial commitment that they have to usually pay, because the communication from the firm or the agency is, look, Dr. Smith, forego several other jobs and committed his time for the next 30 days to be with you. And I mean, it's built right into the contract. I mean, that's clearly when somebody agrees to it. And, you're going to have to pay if you don't want him at this point, because, he committed his time. Where you flip the script and where I'm going, Dr. Smith decides at the 12th hour, there's a better assignment, and he decides not to go. It just leaves the client holding the bag, if you will, without much recourse other than a good recruiter saying, I'm terribly sorry. We won't work with Dr. Smith again, and we'll do our best to get you someone there right away. So it seems like there are protections for the doctors who are able to drive revenue for the recruiting agencies or the locums firms, right? Because without the doctors, healthcare kind of comes to a standstill. So they are always key, right? For a hospital to deliver care, for recruiters, locums, perm, whomever. So there's protections for them, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of protection for the client. There doesn't seem to be a big remedy, and you may see it differently. And if you do, this will be the last time I ever ask you on as our guest, just so you know. But
I get the question. In reality, we have more experience with clients canceling a provider than we do with a provider as a no-show or just deciding I'm not going to go. Now, in the events where that actually happens with a provider saying I'm not going to go, or whether it's a potentially legitimate reason, such as a car accident, et cetera,
Yeah.
versus just I'm going to take this other assignment instead. You're right. There's not a contractual obligation for the firm to pay the client X amount for lost patient revenue based on no one there to bill. The protection has been more specifically on helping to make sure that if a hospital is going to exercise a out clause, they have, just like the provider does, a 30-day out clause. So that that part is equitable. I don't have much. I honestly can't think of a situation where I've had a candidate to say I'm not going to go and there's less than 30 days notice. Now, when that happens, you're right. There's nothing in the contract with the provider that's going to get the provider to cough up money that we can then pass on to the client. But in a lot of cases, the client's going to also push back if they don't exercise the full 30 days. If they give shorter notice, they're a lot of times expecting the firm to just deal with it with the candidate and say, look, if you want our business, you're going to figure out how to make that right. But yeah, I mean,
I never thought of that. I never thought of that situation, Rich, to be candid. What you just said, I never even how a client could leverage the other side of the coin to say, you want to continue to work with it.
Yeah.
You just got to deal with it. So
yeah, some do. I'm not saying not all would do that, but I'm just saying it has come up where that's been the case. I'm trying to think of a situation where we had where a candidate, and not just at U.S. Locums, but other places I've been where I had a candidate who legitimately was just saying, no, not going, or, oh, I forgot I had that. I'm not going to go. It's an uncomfortable conversation with a client, but I've not had one really.
Have you had any providers that, for whatever reason, I'm not referring to an emergency, life showing up at our door,
right?
But for some reason, starting an assignment and then, not completing their commitment? Does that happen?
Yeah, I've had that happen. And sometimes it's a situation where they feel like the assignment was not represented correctly. Maybe there's something about the volume or some other things that are not meeting the expectation. They feel it's an unfair expectation, unreasonable, unsafe, in which case you have to go back and try to make sure, well, what did we tell them and present it as, and why did we do that? But then you also have these conversations with the client as well to try to figure out, look, this is what, Dr. So-and-so is saying. Is that your understanding as well, that, rather than seeing, 25 patients a day, he's being asked to see, 35 and also expected to do that and have all his EMR records done within an 8-hour day. If that's the case, and you're like, well, yeah, really the volume's increased. And okay, well then let's talk about that. Because if you didn't expect him to be seeing 35 a day and he's really not able to do that safely, it sounds like what we have here is we just need to talk through a solution to how do we make this right for both sides. Whereas if it's like an outright thing where the candidate said he could do that, our references bear it out, and he or she's just not able to do that, usually it's the client coming and saying, this isn't working out, this isn't what we paid for. And at that point, they do have the right, if it's for cause, to terminate the assignment, in which case they don't owe anything other than what's been worked up to date. And the candidate's not owed any money beyond that point, because if it's terminated for cause, then it just was a bad outcome that's going to leave neither side happy. But those certainly do come up. Whether it's
does terminate, and I never asked this question or thought about it, but I'm thinking not. If somebody gets termed for cause, unless it goes to like a committee at the hospital, which is really more of a perm doctor going to a committee, it probably isn't showing up in the physician's database. Just if
it's an assignment that's technically ending early, then it's not going to be a reportable thing unless it's ending early for something such as there's something reportable.
Yes, behavioral or clinical or something like that. Yes,
correct. Yeah.
And when you talk to, and I know we're kind of winding down, but when you speak with a client initially, do you ever ask questions specific to what are some of the challenges of the job? So that you can kind of make sure that the doctor's equipped.
Yep,
that they kind of know in advance. So there's
it's not just so the eventual provider maybe going in there knows, but it's so that you, as the representative, understand what you're representing. And it's like you said before, you want to get, the warts out in the open so you know what you're dealing with. And if a client is like, well, look, we've had some challenges. We had a chief or director who was a little tough on people, that's now ended, but there's a reputation out there for we're difficult to work with. And okay, well, tell me about that. You told me that's no longer a relationship that's there. Is there a new chief now? What's going on there? What were some of the things that, led to, that ending? And you're just trying to get a better understanding of it. And if they say, well, no, we just can't keep people and we need to keep locums coming in here, then you know that, okay, well, why is it you're unable to keep, if you're able to hire staff, but you're not able to keep them, what's going on with that? And, kind of like we talked about using your gut before, if a client's kind of hemming and hawing around it, there is an issue that they're understandably sensitive about, but you can say, look, Fred, I understand you're responsible for trying to get the staffing in place. I'm just going to try to help you as best I can. The best way I can do that is so I understand what the situation is. So as I talk to a potential provider, I'm setting them up for success and not sending you someone who ultimately may waste a lot of everyone's time and resources getting them to that point, and ultimately it's not going to work out. Or maybe it's being proactive. It's something that if we know what the issue is and we're very proactive about dealing with it on the front end, and the person does come in and they knew what to expect or that this had gone on, they might be, a little bit more equipped to handle it and help us work through a solution. But the things that tend to be the biggest issues with an assignment on a candidate side when they go in can be mismatched expectations with what the workload or description should have been. And then also, if there's some clinical issues going on, we have to really dig in and figure out, what are you saying is going on clinically that you're not comfortable with? How did that happen? How often is it happening? And then you got to have a talk with the client about it as well and just say, okay, look, Dr. Newmark's giving us some feedback. We need to walk through that with you because we want to make sure this assignment is going to be successful, but he's raised some issues that we have to talk to you about. And, can we do that now? Or do you want to set up a call where, the medical director's on it as well? Because, most physicians, everyone wants the assignment to go well. It's just, what effort are you putting in to help make sure it goes well? And then how are you staying in touch to deal with any issues that kind of come up? But yeah, every assignment can have its challenges on the candidate side or the client side.
So I really like to travel, Rich, and I don't do nearly as much as I'd like. Is medical school and residency a prerequisite before I call you to be able to take one of these assignments?
This gets back to that, making sure you're doing proper credentialing before you send a provider on to a client. Yes.
Before we end, have we left anything on the table at all? Jack, is there anything you're thinking about? Or Rich?
I was always interested in locums. For the 5 minutes I was a recruiter, I was on perm side, and I just wondered what those weird locums people were always up to. So
they always looked like they were having more fun than us.
They did. They were
younger too, at least younger than me. But everybody's younger than me at this point. So,
but so I learned quite a bit about what those people on the floor above me were doing.
So Rich and I even though we've known each other for a long time, we've literally not seen each other for 13 years.
Until we did this. 15 at least.
Yeah, maybe it's closer to 15. Actually, it is probably 15 years or longer. And I must say that Rich has not changed much. His hairline is a little higher, but he still does not.
A little beefier.
Yeah, a little. Well, all right. I was going to not address that, but and not a gray. So, Rich, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You're looking great, my friend.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you coming on because locums is not my direct background. Clearly, I'm familiar with it and have worked within the space, but
sure.
You are a pro's pro, not only at the desk and level, you've managed it at the highest levels, and your knowledge is really deep. So thank you for coming on and sharing your.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me. I had a good time. Glad to hear you thought it was informative, and appreciate it again.
Yeah, thanks so much. And we'll put all of your information down in the description. So if you're a doctor and you want to get a great locums job, contact this guy.
Or if you're a client, that too.
Or client, yeah.
All right. Appreciate it, guys.